we're actually in recession. For most Americans, their standard of living is declining. I don't think the economy is really getting bigger. I think we're spending more and we're borrowing more and going deeper into debt. We're paying more for everything we buy. And a lot of that consumption ends up feeding into the GDP. And so we get a bigger GDP number and we think, oh, that means the economy is growing. But I think it's all being distorted by the inflation and the debt. Meanwhile, individuals that are living in the economy are struggling. Their cost of living is going up. You have a record increase in the number of people holding multiple jobs, not just 2 jobs, but 3 jobs or more, and they still can't make ends meet. You've got record credit card debt, which is now over $1 trillion, first time ever. And we almost have $2 trillion in student loan debt. I mean, that has just exploded. If we really had a growing economy, people would be getting out of debt. Right? Well, that's what happens when you're doing well. You pay off your debt. You build up your savings. The savings rate has collapsed in the last couple of years. That's not a sign of economic strength. That's desperation. People are tapping into whatever savings they have left just to make ends meet. If times were good, the government would be running smaller deficits. They would be collecting more taxes. They wouldn't be spending as much on, government assistance. Our trade deficits are at record highs. If we had a booming economy, we'd be making more stuff. We'd be exporting that stuff, or we'd be importing less because we would just consume what we produced ourselves. But our economy is really shrinking. And that's why we're on life support. We're dependent on foreigners for all the goods that we can't produce. And we have to pay for it on credit because we don't have the real incomes or the savings to afford it. If you compare what we have now, I guess everybody wants to say, look, it's not that bad because look how much worse it was in the 70s where we had inflation 10, 11, 12% for several years. What people don't understand is that you're comparing apples to oranges because the CPI that was in use in the 70s is not the same CPI that we use today. The reason that we didn't get real big increases in the CPI until really after COVID was that there were a lot of forces in the economy at that time that were pushing prices down. And had the government not unleashed all this inflation, we would have seen prices fall. I mean, they never actually fell during any year, but had the government not done that, I'm pretty sure that prices would have gone down and the cost of living would have been lower. Now, a lot of these politicians or Keynesian economists say that's terrible. Oh, that's deflation. That's really a bad deal. We don't want that. That's BS. If prices go down, that is good for the consumer. That provides relief because now the cost of living is lower. You don't need as much money to buy food. You don't need as much money to buy energy. You have more money left over to buy other things. You don't have to go into debt to pay for things. And falling prices is even good for business. As long as their costs are falling in line with their prices, they maintain their margins, and now they can sell more. They make it up on volume because when prices are lower, their customers can buy more stuff. So everybody wins from falling prices, but the government doesn't want that. And so it was able to stop that by unleashing inflation. Inflation is a tax, and people just don't realize it because the government blames it on greedy corporations, on Putin, on OPEC, on everybody but themselves. But it is a hidden tax, and the easiest way to hide it is if you have a productive economy that otherwise would reduce prices. Because if prices were going to go down, let's say by 5%, and they create, 5% inflation so that prices remain the same, nobody realizes how much worse off they are because the government stole something they never had. The free market was going to deliver that benefit, and the government took it. See, what everybody has to understand is every dime that the government spends must be paid for by the public, one way or another. Now, the traditional way to pay for it is with taxes. The government wants to spend money on the military. They want to spend money on, Social Security or Medicare or whatever they're doing. They need to collect taxes because the government doesn't have any real money because the government doesn't really produce anything. It only has the money it takes from the private sector, and then it takes that money from one person and gives it to somebody else. They have to take it first. Well, if they don't take it through taxation, how do they get it? Well, they print it. They sell bonds to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve buys those bonds and puts money into the government's checking account, and then the government just spends that. But when the government spends that money, what it does is it reduces the value of the money that already exists. So everybody's paycheck is diminished in value. Everybody's savings are diminished because now prices go up because you have more money in the economy without new production to give that new money value. And that increase in price that is a result of this deficit spending and money printing is basically a tax. But the people don't realize they've been taxed. So the politicians love it because they can pretend that the voter's getting something for nothing, because the voter doesn't make the connection between the price hikes. And if the economy is really, booming so that prices are dropping, you don't even notice the price hikes. But now the problem is we've created so much money, especially after COVID and all the money we printed there, which was, off the charts, crazy during those years. We now have so much money in the pipeline, and the economy is now being, crippled by more regulation and other things that are making it less productive. We're seeing much greater upward pressure on prices. But I tried to make the point earlier is that we would have even seen more movement in the CPI earlier if it wasn't rigged. I started to say that the CPI we had in the 70s is not the same CPI we have now, because in the 1990s, they changed it all. They changed the methodology for computing price increases. And their goal was to have a lower CPI because they claimed that the CPI was overstating inflation. And so they decided to fix it. But if you measured the prices that we saw, the increases in 2021, 2022, if you used the 1970s CPI and then took the prices that we were living through, they were double digit. I mean, we were probably, the year that we had 9%, it was probably 18%. That was worse than any year of the 1970s or early 1980s. That's how bad it was. Back in the 70s, it was the same basket, and they just said, what did it cost last year? And what does all that exact same stuff cost this year? But now they don't do that. They change the basket. They take stuff out that's gone up. They put stuff in that didn't go up as much. They adjusted for so-called quality improvements. Oh, that's a much higher quality than the one you bought last year, so let's make the price go down. But it's subjective. Is it really better? I mean, and a lot of times the quality goes down. I don't think they ever subtract for falling quality. It's like a one-way street. They just assume everything is getting better, when in many cases, people are substituting lower quality ingredients, or stuff that used to be included. A classic would be airline. People would buy an airline ticket and, they got their seat, they could get food, they could get a pillow, they could get a blanket, they could carry on stuff. Now all of a sudden, all that's extra. It's not part of the airfare anymore. You want to pick your own seat? That's extra. You want to check luggage? That's extra. You want a blanket? That costs more, right? All this stuff now are add-ons. That's not part of the CPI. But if you look at some of the other measures, like where the government uses personal consumption expenditures, there you have lots of hedonics where they just basically say, if steak gets too expensive, well, we'll just kick out steak and we'll put hamburger in there, because, we'll just assume people stop eating steak and they settle for hamburger. And so we can pretend that the price didn't go up. But the quality is going down. I want to eat steak. I can't afford it. And so I'm stuck with hamburger. And according to the government, that means there's no inflation. I mean, by that logic, if I have to give up hamburger and start eating dog food because I can't afford hamburger anymore, as far as the government's concerned, there's no problem because I'm still eating. But, I don't like having to eat dog food. I'd rather eat people food. But this is how the whole thing is rigged. The government, again, they're taxing us through inflation. And so then they're lying to us about how bad it is. And the ultimate irony is all the years that the Fed was printing all this money, creating all this inflation, they were pointing to a rigged CPI that was less than 2%. And they said, we need it higher. We don't have enough inflation. And that was the justification for continuously creating more inflation, because they theoretically said we need to get up to 2%, when in reality, we were already way above 2%. But there's nothing magical about 2%. 1% is better than 2%. If you have 1%, you don't try to get up to 2%. You try to go down to 0 or -1. Lower prices are better than rising prices. Only an idiot economist or a central banker, or maybe some of these Wall Street people, could believe that rising prices are good, or that prices that go up by 2% every year constitute price stability. That's not stability. That's a continuous increase in price. Stable means the prices don't change. We were punishing people for doing exactly what they need to do. Because what makes a real economy grow is savings, because savings is what finances capital investment. Capital investment is what leads to increasing productivity and higher living standards. So everybody wants to buy. That just comes naturally. We all want stuff, so we don't need to encourage that. But the idea that if prices fall, that people will stop spending and therefore prices need to rise to encourage spending is pure BS. People are going to spend anyway, but they're actually more likely to spend if prices are going down than if prices are going up. And here's why. What these Keynesians try to sell this nonsense, that if I think the price is going to go down, I'm just not going to buy it. I'm going to wait to get it cheaper. And therefore, no one's going to buy because we're all going to be sitting back waiting for a better deal. And that is nonsense. People buy things when they want them. And the proof of that is all around us. Cell phones. The first cell phone was probably $2,000-$3,000. Before they used to be a car phone, but when you finally got a portable phone, if you remember, from Wall Street, Gordon Gekko's got this huge thing, that he's holding by his ear. Those things sold for like $2,000 or $3,000, and it was very expensive to use them. I remember when I finally got my first cell phone, I never wanted to use it because it was too expensive. I would say, hey, call me on the weekend. I can't talk. I'm on my cell phone. It's too expensive, right? But the reason a lot of people didn't buy the first cell phones is because they were too expensive. They couldn't afford it. The reason everybody has cell phones now is because they're so cheap. The price going down is what motivated more people to buy. You buy things when you can afford them. And if you can't afford the current price, if the price just goes up, well, then you really can't afford it. Same thing, the first television set probably cost the same as an automobile. Who bought the first television set? Some really rich guy. It was a novelty, but it was a gigantic piece of furniture with like a 2-inch screen, and you probably had 2 channels, and you had 2 or 3 hours a day where you could watch it. I mean, it was, people bought televisions because they got cheaper. Now, people buy televisions all the time. Everybody knows if I buy a television today, a year from now, I could buy a better one for less money. Everybody knows that, but they buy them anyway. The same thing with a computer. Every piece of electronics that you buy, if you just don't buy it and buy it in a year or two, you'll get it cheaper. But people buy them anyway because they want to use them now. Like, I remember the first time I saw a high-def television set, years and years ago. It was in like a Best Buy or something. I walked in, I saw it, and I was really amazed at the clarity. I mean, to me, it was like looking through a window. It was because I had never seen high def before until I went into the store. I was just used to the old tubes that we had, and I really liked that television set. But I didn't buy one, even though I liked it and I wanted it, because it was like $10,000 back then. That was, I could have bought a nice car for that, and so I didn't buy it because it was too much money. But some guy that was a lot richer than me, he bought it. And he gave those companies money that they could use to figure out how to make them cheaper. And because the price went down, they're now so cheap, I got those things in every room of my house. And so does everybody else. I mean, you got people now that are living on welfare that got high definition TVs. I mean, it's because the price came down. If you own a business and you really want to incentivize people to come in and shop, what do? You have a sale. You lower the price. Hey, I'm lowering the price, 10% off, 20% off. Now people, they want to shop. Like, why does everybody come to the stores on Black Friday? Because they lowered the price, not because they raised the price. So it's just complete BS. There's a saying, you talk about a free lunch, that there's no such thing as a free lunch. And that's because somebody's got to pay for that lunch. So if it's free to you, the question is, who's paying for it? Because the food didn't just magically appear. Right? There is a cost. The government can print money, but it can't print stuff. The stuff has to be made. And that's why when you print money without any stuff being made, all that happens is the price of that stuff goes up, right? Because if we could just print money and people could buy stuff, everybody would be rich. We just print up a bunch of money. Why not give everybody millions of dollars and we all be rich? No, the price of everything would just go up. Nobody would be rich. The only way we can all be richer is if we all produce more. Printing more money doesn't change anything. So we need to make more stuff. That's how we can satisfy more demand, is by creating more supply. If we just print money, we increase demand, supply is the same. And so prices go up. And that's the inflation. But yes, what we were able to do is we were able to con the whole world, the Chinese and a lot of other people, into taking the paper that we print for the stuff they produce, because the dollar is the reserve currency. So instead of actually having to make stuff that the Chinese wanted, we just printed money and said, hey, take this. And now they took all this stuff that they made in factories where, they actually had to, invest in them, and people had to do hard work, and maybe they were making, pollution, whatever. But the Chinese economy expended real resources to produce all kinds of goods that are filling up the shelves in Walmart that Americans are, driving home in their big SUVs. And what are they doing? How are we earning all this stuff? The Fed's just printing money and handing it out. What does that cost us? Next to nothing. In the short run, this is a great deal for Americans because we get something for nothing, and the Chinese get nothing for something, except they don't realize they're getting nothing. They think this paper has a lot of value, but in reality, it doesn't, because it's an IOU. It's a claim on U.S. production. But what if, our production is going down? Eventually we're going to wipe all that out with massive inflation when the world doesn't want our dollars anymore, and they try to cash them in. When they try to, buy stuff, it's like, well, what are you going to buy? We don't have our factories anymore. They're all in China. That money's no good. I mean, we run this giant Ponzi scheme. We have a $33 trillion national debt that continues to grow trillions of dollars a year. And we finance it like Bernie Madoff did, because we can't pay anybody back. So whenever a bond matures, we find some other sucker to buy it. And when we have to pay our interest, we find suckers to loan us that money too. But this only continues as long as the suckers are willing to keep lending. But when people want their money back, we don't have it. During the debt crisis, we even admitted that we said if we can't go deeper into debt, we're going to default because we're broke. So all this is going to collapse. The dollar is going to lose its reserve currency status. And then if Americans want to consume, they're going to have to produce. And that's much harder than printing.